What is up, nerds? This is Trip, and today on Homebrewed Christianity, we are continuing our series exploring AI, and we're bringing on a special guest in two ways. One, as an interviewer. That's right, Kester Brewin, who's a part of this series, is jumping behind the hosting microphone because he's talking with Lord Clement-Jones. That's right, Tim Clement-Jones, author of Living with the Algorithm, Servant or Master, AI Governance in the Policy for the Future. He's talking with Kester Brewin. And look, Timothy Clement-Jones is a pioneer of regulation for artificial intelligence and a host of other kind of like technological questions in the way it impacts labor, economics, and such. He's a member of the House of Lords in the United Kingdom. And as you'll see, he's deeply connected, not just in what's going on in the UK, but globally at how we try to think through, regulate, and harness the challenges and the possibilities of AI in life-giving ways, flourishing ways. And it's really fascinating to hear, as you're about to hear in this interview, just what it's like as someone who's been present, digging in the legislative grind of sorts across different administrations in his own country and in ours. And maybe you'll have the experience I had and go, well, at least there are some people that kind of have an idea what's going on and are trying to ask the right questions. But yeah, so thank you, Kester, Tim, for being a part of this series. And if this is your first time here, no, we're putting together a whole series of people wrestling with the question of AI, not just lawmakers, which you're about to hear, but ethicists, theologians, scientists, and philosophers. And our goal over this series of interviews is to do what the series is called, process it, and do it in an interdisciplinary way, and hopefully enable not just Kester and I, as we do the series, to ask questions and get to hear different perspectives from people working in different disciplines or facing different challenges, but also that these conversations and the online engagement over at the Substack, processthis.substack.com, that community will all be able to wrestle with it together, having a little more thoughtful and informed questioning. So there you go. That's what we're up to. And if you want to support the podcast, you want to join the Substack, become a member, get access to the ad-free podcast feeds, or perhaps get access to all of the homebrewed classes we've done over the last few years, like 10 years, then just go to homebrewedcommunity.com. There you'll be able to join the Substack if you want, or you'll be able to go to theologyclass.com and become a member. And if you're a member at Theology Class, it also gets the Substack with it. Okay? It's a new thing, and there's a whole episode explaining it not too long ago. But I'm just saying, go to homebrewedcommunity.com, find ways to support the podcast, get extra content, and, that's what we're doing. We're making things like this possible. And I'm pumped that Kester Brewin is rocking the interviewer microphone because this is a double cool accent episode. We got these English guys rocking it. All right? And look forward to our conversation with Kester and all the Process This community at the end of this series, where we see just how far we've come and what all we're up to. So enjoy, friends.
Welcome, everybody, and so glad that you're here for this expert interview between myself, Kester Brewin, author of Godlike, a 500-year history of AI. And I'm really, really glad and honoured to welcome Lord Tim Clement-Jones, who is an expert on AI in our House of Lords in the UK and has a fantastic book out also called Living with the Algorithm, Servant or Master, AI Governance and Policy for the Future. So, Tim, so glad to have you here with us.
No, great to be here, Kester. And I've read your book, and I think it's terrific.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We were talking just before we started recording about how I've given a spoiler alert to the end of Giordano Bruno, the end of a great crime series. So the poor chap did not come to a wonderful end.
No, but he had a lasting legacy, obviously, which I think you unpack extremely well throughout the book.
I'd just be interested to hear about something of your journey into the House of Lords and then your history of the kind of interest in and concern about AI and algorithmic management. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, a potted history. I became a liberal really because of kind of a whole, because of a whole series of by-election victories. And in a sense, the philosophy came after the campaigning. And I took up Ralph Dahrendorf's Reith lectures. I'm a big fan of the life chances agenda and his whole philosophy, that liberal life chances philosophy, for me, was what real social liberalism, if you like, is all about. And then I've worked with the party, worked with Paddy Ashdown, helped him become the leader. And having been a sort of bit of an apparatchik and been very involved in human rights, home affairs policy, one or two other areas, national security type issues. I joined the Lords in 98. With the Blair government, they started strangely making Liberal Democrats members of the House, which was good, partly because of Paddy's support for Blair, I think. Eventually, having been a health spokesman, I became a creative industry spokesperson. And when the Napster case arrived, I thought, the world is turning digital. So this was a kind of sideways move into digital and tech and so on. And I got increasingly interested in the whole digital world, really. And so after the coalition, we were all backbenchers during the coalition, I kind of appointed myself digital spokesperson, which seemed to be the right thing to do. And I decided, along with Stephen Metcalfe, Tory MP, who I met at an IPT, an industry and Parliament Trust breakfast on tech, we decided that nobody in the House of Commons or the House of Lords really understood the implications of AI. And so we decided to form the All-Party AI Group in Parliament. And, in a sense, everything went from there. I became chair of the AI Select Committee in the Lords. We produced a report in 2018, another one in 2020, and it's been a kind of roller coaster ride ever since, really, culminating in me kind of putting together all the kind of stuff in my head over 8 years or whatever, and coming up with, what I thought about the future of AI and the way we needed to regulate it.
So we're in a general election period here in the UK, and just quickly, part of that snap election was the ditching of the DPDI, the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill. Did that cause you grief to see that go, or were you glad to see the back of it?
There was dancing in my street, I can tell you. It was fantastic. I've been working on the whole data protection agenda for many moons, but this particular element of it was wholly unwelcome. I didn't like the way the consultation went in 2021. I thought the wrong questions were being asked, and I thought that the government was ignoring even the good answers it was getting, and it was coming up with the wrong conclusions. We were faced with a kind of divergence with the EU GDPR, which was wholly nonsensical in terms of corporate governance, in terms of civil society, in terms of human rights and so on. For instance, diverging from automated decision-making rights for the data subject made no sense at all for me. I think we need to go further than Article 22 in EU GDPR, let alone start watering down all this kind of stuff. So no, when it died in the wash-up, and I think I helped to create a kind of climate against it to some degree, which I was pleased to do. And I think Labour started off by being, reasonably accepting that it was okay. But I think as we went through, I think both the Commons and the Lords front benches thought, blimey, this is actually a lot worse than we realised. And I worked extremely harmoniously with them, particularly with Baroness Jones, who's the front bench person who probably will become the DSIP minister, I suspect, in the new government. And, it was really gratifying that they decided in the wash-up to play hardball and let the whole thing drop. And, the good things will come back, like, maybe deep fake regulation, the bereavement issues that weren't dealt with properly in the Online Safety Act and so on. So I think we'll get some good things, data trusts maybe. I'm hoping when I see the Labour manifesto in a couple of days, that it will be not dissimilar to what we've put in our manifesto. And just to date our conversation, we've just launched our manifesto. And I was gratified to see that, we do talk about AI regulation and increased, data protection in those circumstances. So, no, the answer is no regrets. We need to start with a clean page. And I have every confidence, because that was the message that I got, that Labour were thinking of an AI Act in the King's Speech, or at least a draft, given that we were dropping the data protection bill. So I think we've got every reason to be pleased with the trajectory currently.
So just for context, for those who are listening from the US or will be listening from the US, in the UK, we have more of a three-party politics. We have the Conservative Party currently in power, the Labour Party, who are looking strong in the current elections, and then we also have the Liberal Democrats as well, and Tim sits as a Liberal Democrat peer, but has been working extremely hard across all the parties to bring about much better regulation of AI, particularly in a recent bill that went through our Houses of Parliament, which didn't make it to the end, which was probably a good thing. At the kind of other end of the spectrum, back in November, we had the AI Safety Summit at Bletchley Park, and there was a big focus there on the kind of major existential risks of AI. Are the robots going to kill us all? And in your excellent book, Living with the Algorithm, you do flag that history tells us that societies can and do collapse. How dangerous do you think this AI technology could be? And what makes it different from other technologies that we've seen, like social media?
Yes, well, that's a really good question. And we can't deny that there are existential risks. My problem is that I think there are risks here and now. And I think you need a dual-pronged strategy. You need to recognize that, for instance, the risks of bias and misinformation, disinformation, over-reliance, for instance, is a major risk if we're not careful. If we don't keep some of the skills that we're used to having, that could be a real problem. We could find that we're wholly reliant on a generative AI tool without the analytical skills that, as humans, we've historically had. So I think we've got to deal with some of those issues. But also, when you look forward to what artificial general intelligence should do, that is another actual good reason for making sure that we now regulate. So that, for instance, we do make sure that we risk assess when we develop new tools, to make sure that, we're not just simply doing away with a whole slew of jobs, for instance. We're just de-skilling everything, and all we have left is basically gig economy type jobs at the end of the day. I mean, we need to understand that artificial general intelligence could be, a really important development as and when it arrives. Now, none of us know when it will arrive. Some people say within 10 years. Other people think it will never happen. But I don't want to take the risk that we haven't prepared for it. So I think we should deal with the current risks, and I think we should plan for the future risks. But the attitude of government with the Bletchley, and I have nothing against Bletchley. My parents met at Bletchley.
Incredible.
In 1943. So I actually am a big fan of Bletchley. I'm a member of the Friends of Bletchley. But I think the AI Safety Summit was a bit of a diversion, quite frankly, pushing out the issue of saying, oh, no, we believe that regulation would stifle innovation. It's all about existential risk. Let's go off and talk at these grand international summits and so on. I mean, it was quite interesting that the South Koreans decided to get rid of the word safety. It was just an AI summit as far as they were concerned. I think the French, who I've recently talked to, as long as their government stays in place, are very keen to have a rather different emphasis when they convene, because, of course, they've already got the AI Act. So they'll be much more interested in making sure that there are kind of international standards being developed and so on, which is one of my passions. It's the international operability that I think the Bletchley Summit should have talked about. The Koreans have begun to talk about it, and I think the French will really go for it. And actually, the most productive thing that came out of the Korean summit this time was the national digital bill of rights, which the Koreans have really gone for, backed by the OECD. So they could be ahead of the pack. And I'm very keen on a digital bill of rights as well.
And it's interesting with these summits. We've had the one in London and in Seoul, and then there's going to be the one in Paris in February, I think it is, next year, all trying to deal with this global cooperation on AI. But all the big companies tend to be in the States. There's obviously China and so on. Do we have a sense in which the way in which the US is falling into line on international regulation, or China or other players as well?
Yes, we do. I mean, they've put forward no less than 80 bills in Congress, most of them bipartisan. So there is a willingness. What I don't think they've done is focus on, focus enough on exactly what they want to do. And I think they're all waiting to see how the presidency unfolds in the elections later on this year. But it's relatively bipartisan. I mean, for instance, the person who heads up the initiative on AI in the White House is exactly the same person under Biden as it was under Trump. So, this was one of the very few areas where the transition kept the same people in place. And so, I'm actually quite optimistic. But, I mean, that is quite apart from the fact that if you look at the standard setting, the National Institute for Standards and Technology in the States have developed a great risk assessment framework. There's a whole lot of work going on. And then, of course, you have the pressure that happens through litigation in the States. I mean, the Americans are great litigators, probably encouraged by lawyers like me, I suspect. But great litigators, and basically it's all about the standards, so that if you have a set of standards and you don't conform to them, then you become liable for negligence, for your consumer product, whatever it happens to be. And so people tend to look to see what their legal liability is and avoid that by adopting those standards. So even if there is no regulator, they tend to start conforming. And this is the pressure, basically, to have these international standards. And the OECD at the moment is engaged in crunching together all the different risk assessment framework standards, including the NIST one, but also anything that's going to be produced in Europe. The CENELEC standards bodies will be involved because of the AI Act, and so on. So that is beginning to happen.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. It's interesting talking about Bletchley and thinking back to World War II and the story I tell in the book about the connections between the birth of AI and the atomic bomb. And it's in a sense, that was a very, very powerful weapon, which was meant to bring about great things and to kind of save the world in some senses. And I know there are some people saying, well, AI could find the solution for us for the climate crisis, except I think it takes 10 times the carbon and energy power to search for something on Google Bard than just on normal Google search. So it is an extraordinary consumer of energy. And that, for me, seems to be something that's not quite been dealt with at these big summits, is what are the energy implications of AI at the same time as some of the other risks as well.
Absolutely. I mean, just to comment on the Robert Oppenheimer thing, I thought your interpretation of the Hindu scriptures that he quotes absolutely, fascinating, if you dig underneath what he was really saying. But yes, I mean, the environmental issues, the first chapter of Kate Crawford's book, AI Atlas, is extremely cogent on the environmental issues. And quite by chance, 2 days ago, I was sent a couple of papers from Loughborough University here, all about the decarbonisation of the digital world, particularly AI, cloud, the power that servers require, all this kind of thing. I mean, and then even if you then look at all the rare earths and the lithium mining and so on and so forth, I mean, this is we think of digital technology as being clean technology. Well, I think we've got to wake up and think about the energy use and the energy, the way the energy is produced and so on, and the minerals used in the process for the hardware, because we are thundering down a non-environmental track, basically.
It's very interesting, actually. Last week, I was down in Cornwall for work, and for those in the States, Cornwall is right down in the southwestern tip of the UK, and it's actually the first place in the UK to industrialize, and it kind of almost deindustrialized by the time the Industrial Revolution came in the UK. But I was speaking to business leaders down there, one of whom is opening a lithium mine in Cornwall to try and get greener lithium for all these kind of AI chips and everything. So it's fascinating how that part of the world has kind of come full circle in terms of the minerals and the stuff that we're going to need in order to make this work, basically.
And it could be a much safer form of mining lithium as well, because at the moment they have to create a kind of soup, don't they, and then dry it out, and it's all.
That's right.
I mean, in China and places, it sounds absolutely. And then when you look at these lithium mines, I mean, they look absolutely horrible, and the impact they have on the physical human is pretty horrible. That's why it may be that we have got these reserves down there. That might be much more environmentally sound.
We hope so, yeah. So in your book, Living with the Algorithm, you've said that you've got some faith that, and then you say three things: by regulating for the risks, developing necessary skills, and cooperating internationally, we can succeed in harnessing AI technologies for optimum human benefit. Not that it's a foregone conclusion. So what's your assessment on how we're doing? Give us an update, a school report on regulation, developing skills, and international cooperation. What grade would you give us?
Well, I think we're doing pretty badly in the UK in various ways. I mean, it's all about stimulating growth and investment and innovation, and forget the responsible AI aspect. And I actually thought that Theresa May started off pretty well a few years ago. It's the last 2 years. It's the well, maybe longer than that. It's the kind of post Boris Johnson period where I don't think Dominic Cummings was very keen on any form of ethics or regulation in terms of AI development. I mean, some people see everything, through the adoption of technology as being the key thing, rather than trying to make sure that this technology is for our benefit, is for human benefit. And that is my motivation. And, I'm an optimist because there is international pressure. The OECD, came up with a set of very viable principles in 2019 and has proceeded very solidly to produce some really, really good work. The Council of Europe started off about the same time, looking at the framework for an AI ethical human rights new framework convention. They've come up with a draft, which I think is going to be adopted this September. So that's good. The international work, we've got the AI Act in Europe, which many people said would never have ever arrive. But they managed in a flexible way to build in provisions about generative AI pretty much at the last moment, which I thought was quite impressive. Now, a general mantra is, it's very complicated and so on. Actually, a risk-based form of regulation. I mean, risk is what businesses know about. It's what audit and risk committees are all about. Exposure. Commercial exposure is what business know about. So, this is going with the grain. I know it's a very long act, but then so was the Digital Markets Act, so was the Digital Services Act. And once you've got it, you've ingested it, so to speak, as a compliance person, as a DPO or whatever the equivalent will be in the future, I don't think it's too complicated. And, in a sense, what they're trying to do consciously is create a new GDPR effectively for AI, and time will tell whether people do treat it as the gold standard or not. But in the meantime, whether or not we regulate, whether or not Singapore regulates, or Korea, or Australia, or the States, the creation of these standards pushed by things like the AI Act, actually, I think will be pretty good. So that's why I'm an optimist, because I do think the pressure is there. And, I'm going to be so interested to see what the other two parties say about AI regulation. I mean, I was very gratified that my own party took this on board, as, because you could think, well, no, there's housing and there's the cost of living and there's the NHS and there's the sewage, all that kind of stuff. That's the most important thing. Well, of course, the here and now is very important. But I think we also have to be very much looking at the future. And that's where the skills come in. And of course, that does worry me, because we haven't done nearly enough on that front. But you could argue we've got something to build on. We've got the lifelong learning loans that the government set up. I'd like to see, lifelong learning accounts where you actually get grants in midlife or whenever it is, at any stage in life, in order to upskill to meet the challenges of AI. Because, we're going to have to think of life and careers in 5-year chunks, I think. I don't think we're going to be able to say, I'm going to become a lawyer and that's going to suit me. And once I've learnt it all, that's fine. I don't have to go back to law school anymore, or whatever it happens to be. I mean, lawyers could be replaced in 10 years' time. My friend Richard Susskind very much believes that. I talked to the Bar Council on recently about this, and people have to wake up and smell the coffee. Basically, the professions are going to be under threat. And somebody with lesser skill, for instance, people have been thinking, oh, we're going to be replacing paralegals. Well, actually, paralegals are going to be able to do the job of a senior partner in a law firm using generative AI. It's going to be entirely the other way around. And then how do you train people to become those hotshot lawyers? Well, maybe you never do. Maybe all you do is you insert the question into Perplexity or something, and it tells you the answer. Well, I think we have to be prepared for that. So I'm not against making sure that we're able to be flexible, but we have to have the skills and we have to have the government wherewithal in order to encourage all that. And they play an absolutely crucial part in all of this. And our development, our apprenticeships, our development of skills has been way, way under par for quite some time now.
I ask people, have you had any training in AI? And I have never met anybody who's actually been in a job who's like, oh yeah, the company have invested in us to train us on how to use generative AI well. It feels like people have been given this extremely powerful tool or weapon, and they're just kind of using it willy-nilly and learning on their own. A report came out recently. A lot of people are just looking to social media and YouTube to train themselves on these tools, which seems completely crazy. So we do need that investment in proper training for how do people use AI in the proper way. I was reading a quote the other day, someone saying, I want AI to do my dishes and do the laundry so that I can do art. But at the moment, it's AI doing art, leaving me to do the dishes and the laundry.
That's why I use that phrase, servant or master, because it's really important we get this right. That is so, so correct. We've got to think about all these things.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a video uncovered a couple of weeks ago by Atlantic magazine where a senior engineer at OpenAI he'd been doing a little kind of Q&A with people. I don't think they ever thought it would come out in that same way, but he said, I guess it's kind of deeply unfair that a group of people can build AI and just take everyone's jobs away, and there's nothing you can do to stop them right now. But then he actually goes on in the answer and says, well, okay, if you do want to do something about it, and two of the things he lists are get governments to care and get people to care. Now, I wonder if you feel that governments care enough, but also do people on the ground actually get the coming risks? We know that there's been trouble with kind of getting people to understand the kind of realities of the climate crisis, But do we think that people really do care enough about the coming risks? And if not, how do we get people to care about what's coming?
No, it's a really difficult one. And, the other aspect, which we haven't talked about, which is very much part of this, is this kind of Goliath aspect of the fact that you've got, maybe 5, maybe less as time goes on, because they're all cross-invested in this weird and wonderful way. But, what we've got is, if we're not careful in coming down the track in the future, is this kind of Coke versus Pepsi thing where you actually have to choose. I mean, already we see that in the digital world with Apple and Android, with cloud services, with social media. I mean, the digital world creates natural monopolies if you're not careful, or at least oligopolies. And getting people to understand that is a real problem. Getting people to care I think it is the role of politicians, basically. We have to make sure that you get proper digital understanding, digital literacy in school. Older people, we need to make sure they're not digitally excluded, but it is a very, and you need a proper strategy for all of that. And I don't get the sense whether for media literacy or digital literacy, we've really had that from government. And it's something that I've raised on a very regular basis, not least with the Online Safety Act, because let's face it, that's where it starts, the danger of algorithmic amplification of harmful social media posting and so on, pornography or, threats of violence and, issues to do with children. Grooming, and there's an awful lot happening there on social media, which we finally got round after 5 years of green paper, white paper, draft bills, and I've sat on more committees than most people have had hot dinners doing this stuff. Finally we get round to doing it. So that is, for me, that safety area for online harms and so on, really, really important. But, they also need to care about the whole question of substitution or augmentation of your roles in employment. The whole question of recruitment now being increasingly done by AI. The whole question of surveillance by the police. Using live facial recognition. We need to sensitize people to all of that. And of course, the government made it their business to desensitize people, saying, oh, no, it's fine. The Metropolitan Police are going to be putting in more of this stuff. It's a great thing. These are the number of criminals we've caught and so on. I think we need a debate about biometrics in a big time. And we haven't had any of that. So, I think it is up to governments. But of course, that then depends on who you're going to, vote for, who the next government is going to be. And, some people are very blithe about this. I don't know in the States. I mean, it's been very interesting. Individual cities have tended to ban live facial recognition, Portland, Oakland, Chicago, and so on. And I'm not sure that it really depends on your political party in the States, because I suspect that Republicans are as paranoid as Democrats in terms of the use of new technologies, which is probably a good thing. I mean, I think you have to value freedom, and you have to say, well, look, I do not want to be subject to surveillance. I don't want this to be a sort of Xinjiang, basically. I want to make sure that it's my choice if I choose to be surveilled by facial recognition or whatever it may be.
So with elections very, very imminent in the UK and coming in the States in November, if people were going to ask a candidate one question to kind of delve into their attitudes on AI and what they think people should be doing, what question might that be? Oh,
I think, the trouble is it's one of those kind of blue wall questions, probably, rather than a red wall question. But is how are you going to, make sure that we benefit from AI rather than are harmed by it in society? Now, it's a pretty basic question, but that, to me, I think is important going forward. And whether you get an answer out of most candidates is a question. I would hope that the modern candidate would at least understand the dangers of having things like deep fakes and disinformation in an election campaign. And of course, what produces that is a lot of it is AI and amplification through social media and so on. So probably the connection can be made to the election campaign. And they may think, oh, yes, well, of course, this doesn't just apply to elections. It applies to, society in general and people's jobs and so on and so forth. But the last thing we want is for people to be concerned by the adoption of new technology. I mean, the motive for regulation is not just for the hell of it. It's so we don't have a form of modern Luddism. We want public trust in technology. I mean, I've beefed about the use by the NHS of patient data and so on, because there was no real attempt to build trust in what was being done.
Yeah.
It's a great thing if you can have patient data that's fully anonymized and is used for research. You've got, a huge number of databases which could be exploited for, learning much more about how to crack various diseases, cancer, and so on and so forth. But if you don't get public trust for it, it puts both arms behind your back when you're trying to do this stuff. And the trouble is that not enough attempt was made to get that trust. And of course, when you get something like the way that the app, the COVID app was developed during the pandemic in this kind of opaque way, when it was just, it's all for your own good kind of thing. And then it didn't work anyway. So you built up mistrust, and then it was a hopeless thing because Apple and Google said, no, we don't want that. We don't want any centralized data in this. It's got to be decentralized. And that took the rug from under the government's feet and NHS's feet. So, it was completely fruitless, and they should have understood that to start with, quite frankly.
Yeah. You describe yourself as an optimist in the book. Just finally, what makes you optimistic about how the next 5 years will pan out in terms of these extraordinary technologies?
Well, I'm an optimist because I do believe that you can have sensible regulation. I mean, I felt, 2 bills out of 3, I felt a job reasonably well done. You never get exactly what you want. But I thought the Online Safety Act turned out okay in the end. There are a few bells and whistles extra that were promised that didn't arrive. And the same for the Digital Markets Bill, now Act, that we put through. Which is all about competition and making sure that the Competition and Markets Authority can impose codes of conduct and therefore prevent conduct in the future arriving, which is very helpful when you're dealing with big tech companies. But the third one clearly was not good. But I have some confidence that, especially as we increase our knowledge and understanding in this area, that we can effectively regulate. Now, inevitably, it doesn't always work the first time. You've got to keep coming back. But, over the years, we've had some pretty good product regulation. The other thing that fills me with some optimism is the way that the regulators are actually cooperating. We've got the Digital Regulators Cooperation Forum with Ofcom, with the FCA, with the Competition Authority, and with the ICO. And I've got a lot of time for the ICO in many ways, although I think they should have been much more sucking their teeth about the latest data protection bill. But for my money, I would make them the AI regulator, and therefore putting them together in this cooperation forum, building up a centre of excellence on AI, audit AI, risk assessment and so on, is absolutely crucial, and it's begun to happen. So, I think they'll be right when we start regulating here, which I'm very confident we will. I think that we'll have regulators who are up to speed with all of this and will be able to do the necessary. We've just got to get the legislation in place, basically. So that's why I'm an optimist domestically, and internationally. I've already explained, I think, that I'm, pretty sure we're on the right track internationally. I mean, I spoke to the French digital ambassador the other day, and he absolutely gets this stuff. Now, I just hope that the French government stay in place, as I say. because they've got the right idea. They're working within the EU framework. So what's not to like?
And there, really, we have it. We're in an enormous period of democratic churn, and that will have very significant impacts on all of us internationally to do with the way that regulation emerges as a way of holding these huge data companies to account in terms of the impacts that they're having on us. I do highly recommend Tim's book, Living with the Algorithm. Really, really fantastic overview and an optimistic one about how democracy and the rule of law can really help us to innovate and to bring about social good as well. Tim, thank you so much for giving your time to us today. And we look forward to fantastic regulation that brings about brilliant innovation in the future.
Great pleasure, Kester, and thank you.
Pleasure.
Hey, you made it all the way to the end of the episode. Well, you know what that means? That means you're awesome. You know what all the cool kids do like yourself? They share the brew, because the best brew is a shared brew. So share this episode with someone you think would enjoy it. If you love it, if you dig it, or if you go, whoa, I got a question I'd like to engage, then you should head over to the Substack. That is the easiest place to interact, reflect, connect, meet other people, send me your questions and feedback. And also, if you love it and you want to make it possible, then go to homebrewcommunity.com and you can find the ways to support the podcast, connect with community, and get access to over 45 plus classes we've done over the years. If you want to hang out in person, then come to Theology Beer Camp, October 17th and 19th in Denver, Colorado. theologybeer.camp. That's the URL. Come on out and nerd out with your geek out in the flesh.